Blake Nestle. I want to start this off by stating that I believe, based on what you've said in your own work, that your opinion on gun ownership has evolved over time and you're not as tacitly supportive of anti-gun legislation/positions as you once were. I think we both approach this topic from a place of good faith, wanting to balance the rights of the individual with the safety of the society around them. That being said, I think we may disagree on what best contributes to that balance, and that is what I'd like to discuss if you're willing. Recently, I saw a video wherein Alyssa Milano asked Americans to stop buying guns during this pandemic. Let's leave aside the Me Too hypocrisy elephant in the room and focus on the audacity of the message in that video. In a time where this is increased potential for lawlessness and societal breakdown, people are seeking out effective means of defending themselves from a potential threat. So why is this being spoken about as though it's odd or illogical? I find it peculiar, kindest word I could use, that the people who publicly and vociferously claim to champion the safety of the individual are often exuberantly supportive of empowering the state, the primary medium for abusing the individual throughout all of human history. I also find it peculiar that these same individuals, who can both afford to and often do have armed security around them practically 24/7, talk a great deal about imbalances of power. Anyone who fancies themselves anti-gun, a position I find rather humorous, seeing as people who hold said positions are clearly fine with the state owning firearms, making them not so much against gun ownership, but pro-gun ownership monopoly in the hands of the state, an oddly authoritarian stance for self-proclaimed people's champions. My question at this point is, where are the reasonable voices amongst you? Who amongst you has a suggestion that would be effective at reducing gun violence that simultaneously respects the rights of millions of your law-abiding neighbors? I'm hoping you, as a critic of a powerful organization that would happily weaponize anything they could to move against you, can see how potentially abusable something like red flag laws are. They would essentially grant individuals the power to write KRs on one another, and I would assume that's not something you'd be remotely okay with. I hope you and your wife are weathering the storm all right. Stay healthy, and I look forward to more of your work. Hey, thanks, Blake. All right, so here we go. Gun rights. I probably will in the future talk about this ad nauseum, from all the different aspects of it. So I'm not going to try to do a full, answer of every single point you've brought up here, because I can't be an apologist for celebrities who have, security guards and gun details with them. I understand the need for that. And I understand why it could be looked at as hypocrisy as well, that somebody would like to be in a society that doesn't have guns while they see the need to have guns in order to protect themselves. I don't necessarily see how that has to be a hypocritical point of view, but I do understand how you would see it that way. So, in other words, if they, it doesn't have to be hypocritical, because maybe said celebrity would be more than happy to get rid of their security detail if the rest of the world would get along without guns too, right? But because they have guns, the celebrity has to have guns. Anyway, and here I am acting as a celebrity apologist when I said I wasn't going to do that. So you asked if there are any reasonable voices amongst us. Well, I try to put myself out there as a reasonable voice, so let me give it my best shot. Yes, my views on this have changed. I would say that my views on this have not changed so much as widened to understand that there are bigger questions here than how do we stop or prevent school shootings. My initial interest in guns and gun violence had to do with school shootings and kids being shot. And of course, all of us think that that is a horrible tragedy that should be prevented at any and all costs, or not any and all costs, but at as it needs to be prevented. And if we need to make some sacrifices in order to prevent that, then we need to do that. But how do we go about doing that smartly? And as you said, how do we do it without violating people's rights? It is beyond my control or any other individual's control that we have the right in the United States to bear arms, to own and bear arms. That has been clarified over and over again, gone up and down through the Supreme Court, and it's not something that I'm going to take away tomorrow. And the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe we shouldn't take it away. But that being said, we also have a right to movement. That's a human right. It's in European declarations of human rights. It's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that you have the freedom to move around, to go from place to place. And yet, do you have a right to just walk onto an airplane anytime you want so you can go from place to place? No, you don't. Do you have a right to just get in any car anywhere you want and just go anywhere you want? No, you don't. Do you have a right to just get on a bus anywhere and go anywhere you want, or order an Uber? No, you don't. You got to pay for these things. There's an exchange factor, or you have to have a license if you're going to fly a plane. You have to pay for a ticket if you're going to be a passenger on a plane. You have to get a license to drive a car. So we all recognize that we have this right, this human right to move, to get around, to take our bodies where we want them to go. And yet we curb that right through various ways because services are provided to us to facilitate that right. But even if we break it all the way down to walking, we still don't have the right to walk anywhere we want. I can't walk into somebody else's house. I can't walk into a government building anytime I want. I can't walk into the CIA and go have a conversation with the head of the CIA just because I feel like it, because I have the freedom to move. So again, this is a right. We all recognize it's a right, but we curtail that right based on other rights. And that's where this sort of thing comes into play. How do we balance this out so that other people's rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, etc., are not also being infringed upon by gun owners? That's the big question, and it's a tough question, obviously. And the best, most rational solution I've been able to come up with that I think would truly work, or at least it would work to a degree that is better than I think what we've got now, is to adopt a very similar, analogous limitation on gun ownership in the same way that we've limited the power of movement here in the United States when it comes to driving. You don't get to drive around in the United States unless you have a license, and that license is only gotten when you can prove that you are competent to drive, because you're taking a multi-ton vehicle that is very easily capable of mass murder, and you're taking it out on the road. You can harm yourself, you can harm others, and thousands of people do every single day. So we still allow that right to be carried out, but we limit it by saying you have to have a license, and we're not going to let you drive around unless you got one, because we want competent drivers on the road. We don't want incompetent drivers. Now, as wonderful or unwonderful as that system is, it still leaves the door open for people to have accidents, to be incompetent, but at least there's some bridge put there towards competence. There's some demand being made that at one point in time, you demonstrated that you understood the rules of the road well enough that we could trust you with this multi-ton vehicle, and we could trust that you weren't going to go out and just run over 50 people on your first time out. And if we did not put such license demands down, would there be more accidents? Almost certainly there would be. How could there not be? Because the level of competence demanded of drivers would not be as high. And so we would have more accidents than we have. We, limit it with other ways, with seat belts and mileage laws, and or speed laws, how fast you can drive, stuff like that. So all these, limitations or governors are put on this right. So let me carry all of that whole little beautiful analogy I just created, and let me carry that right over to the guns and say we should have licenses for guns, and not just a license to own a gun, but an actual training license that shows that you have demonstrated to a trained person who knows what they're doing, you have demonstrated to that person that you are competent with this deadly weapon. There really is no other description for a gun. It's not a toy. It's not something you use to hunt. It's a deadly weapon. It's the only reason guns exist, is to harm or kill things, right? The whole target shooting thing, just spare me, right? I mean, yes, that exists in the same way that race cars exist. We're entertained by them. They push them, that sort of thing. Great. But that's not the primary purpose of a car, and it never was. That's not why cars weren't invented to have road races or the Indy 500. Guns weren't invented so we could have marksman competitions. Guns were invented to kill other people. So if you're going to have one and you're going to demonstrate or exhibit carry out your right to have one, then you should first be made to demonstrate that you can be trusted with one. I don't think that's an unreasonable demand. Yes, absolutely, positively, there's a whole bunch of, 2A purists who will disagree with me about that and say, it doesn't say that anywhere, so therefore, in the Constitution or Bill of Rights, and therefore I don't agree with it. Well, great. You go off and make your own society, because there's all kinds of things that aren't written in the Constitution or Bill of Rights that we have to put up with and we got to deal with in order to have a society of a few 100 million people here in the United States where we can get along with each other and we can trust each other well enough that we don't have to, walk around with guns, paranoid and crazy about one another killing one another, right? We've got all these laws and the foundations of our society in place for exactly that reason. And this is just another one of those things, I think, that would make this smoother and make it easier and would make it so that we are better able to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Can put testing regulations in place, can put different kinds of licenses in place in the same way that we have different licenses for cars versus, trucks, versus motorcycles. I mean, you got different kinds of things that classify competence at different levels. Do the same thing with guns, pistols versus rifles versus shotguns, let's say, that kind of thing. So that's an immediate answer that I have. There could be other ideas, but that's the one I've got. And you asked, so I answered. There you go.